All right, so we'll get started here. Thank you all for joining us. This is a presentation, a workshop by Nivati. We do have a booth out in the main hall area if you guys come by. We have a therapeutic massager that we're giving away. Just doing a giveaway today, so make sure you come by, throw in a business card, and we'll get you set up for that. Today's topic is talking about the new pandemic and how to support families in the mental health crisis. My name is David Malmborg. I oversee communities and marketing for Nivati. And then with me on stage is Haeli Harris, who's our lead clinician. She's really the important one here today. I'm just here to get some prep work kind of in play, and then she's got a great workshop for us. This is me. So obviously I have a family, and I was in the pandemic, so therefore I qualify to speak for you guys today. This was our family photo we took in 2020 when masks were there. We have this kind of role, a mission statement, if you will, at Nivati to help break down the stigmas associated with mental health. There's a lot of stigmas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And so in order to do that, one of the easiest ways to actually break down stigmas with mental health is to actually talk about it and share your story. So I personally don't say I'm a person that struggles with mental health, but the pandemic put a lot of new stresses on all of us. And at the time, I was a managing director for a marketing agency out of Salt Lake City, where I'm based out of. And I actually had a lot of people, employees of mine, who I thought were pretty good friends, and they are in all reality, but they gave me some really honest feedback that I sucked at communicating. And that actually was like it hit me really personally. Like I thought I was really good at communicating, but they kept telling me like I'm doing a terrible job. And so I actually started talking to a counselor because it really started to like hit me in a personal state. And then I found out like talking to a counselor, again, not one who'd say I'd have like mental health issues or challenges or anything like that, but it was really eye-opening how helpful it was to talk to somebody about this. And even what I was starting to take personal, realizing that it wasn't a personal issue per se, it was actually something that I just needed help to understand myself. And what I learned from that was that I actually am not so bad at communicating, but what I'm terrible at is actually truly being honest with what I need or want in a situation. And I don't communicate that very well. And that was actually really hindering relationships, not with just my coworkers, which is what really kind of was the catalyst for me, but it actually was I realized like how much it was hurting my relationship with my family, my kids, my wife. And so anyways, that's my personal story with counseling. It's actually wonderful, and it's been great to be a part of. They also say in 2020, like if you didn't end 2020 in counseling or with a dog, then you didn't actually run through 2020. So I did both. I got a dog. This is my dog, London. She's a puppy. She's 1 year now. We walk every morning, and I do love her. So I did the full transit of doing counseling and having a puppy, a new pet, by the end of 2020. So journey completed, right? So that's my story. Well, what we're going to talk about today is actually the mental health crisis that is going on. There are 48% of parents that are experiencing increased stress levels since the pandemic started. Now, what I want to know is who's the 52 other percent? Because honestly, like who has not seen an increase in stress over the last couple of years? It's there. And what's crazy, it's not crazy, but like the difficult part that's a little bit buried in the stat here is as the trickle-down effect, right? The actual effect that the stress parents are having and how they're showing their stress affects the little ones in the family. There was this saying growing up, like, as mom goes, so does the family, right? So, like, if mom's crazy or having a moment, like, everybody else is kind of crazy and having a moment as well, right? And it's not just moms, although it looks like there's probably a lot of moms in here, but dads as well, families in general, like, even when the little ones is having a moment, it really affects everybody. Like, we're social beings, and so therefore, if everybody's stressing out, if one person's stressing out, everybody in the family is stressing out. And that's what's like not really hidden in here. So Obviously, there's a ton of new stressors that we're dealing with over the last couple of years. This is from a study that came out of the American Psychology Association. So obviously, COVID-19 fears, and that's not even going away. Like this Omicron is just stressing everybody else out. Transition from work in office to work remote, and I'm sure most of you are in HR, had to go through this transitional phase, and probably stressed you out, and other managers for that matter, at a higher level. Social unrest, it's been quite a crazy couple of years. It feels like it was wild to me to realize that January 6th was only, like that incident at Capitol Hill was only a year ago, right? Doesn't that feel like forever ago? Economic uncertainty, political polarization, they feel new, but at the same time, like it just is exacerbated, I think, by the pandemic. And then on top of that, we have all the stuff that was stressing us out before this pandemic, which hasn't gone away, right? The mass shootings, climate change, immigration, sexual harassment and assault, the opioid pandemic, suicide rates. Like half of us, in theory, if not all of us, were already stressing about this. Then we add this on top of that. And then for parents, and if you go to the next one here, so for parents, we have additional stresses that have really like jumped in. And I look at this list of stressors, and again, it comes from the same study here from the American Psychological Association. But parents are stressing out on top of everything we just talked about because of disrupted routines. Families getting the virus, managing remote learning, meeting basic needs, access to healthcare services, missing major milestones. And I look at this list and I realize, like, is that just unique to parents? Like, I think all of us are increasing our stress levels just from this alone, right? And so there's no question that we all have an increased amount of stress. So what we're going to talk about today is have Haeli really start working through on how we actually handle and cope with that stress and giving us an opportunity to understand what we can do to better ourselves. So Haeli Harris, our lead clinician at Nivati, I'll let you go now.
Okay, so as David talked about, we are seeing increased levels in stress, and I can probably bet that pretty much everyone in here has had increased levels of stress over these last couple of years. But why does this stress matter? What does it do to us? What does it do to our employees? That's kind of what we want to be thinking about. Well, we know that stress, when people are chronic stress and have this constant stress, they're more likely to be ill. They're more likely to have sick days. They're more likely to get colds and illnesses. It's also going to affect their behaviors. It's going to lead to decrease in activity, higher substance use. When people are stressed, they turn to substances, overeating, and withdrawing socially, which we don't want that. We don't want people to withdraw socially. We've already been withdrawing a lot, too much. And along with physical health, it's not just illnesses, but it does start impacting our cardiovascular system, our digestive system, our endocrine system. We know when people have higher levels of stress, they're more likely to have physical problems, and they're more likely to have to go to the doctors. People with high anxiety are, I want to say, 3 times more likely to go to a doctor's than people that don't struggle with anxiety. And then the main one that we're here to talk about today is how stress affects our mental health. Higher stress levels means that we usually don't turn to healthy coping skills. Usually when people get stressed, they turn to things like substances, overeating, overspending. And so we know that the stress is affecting people's mental health, and then it has kind of this trickle effect where it's affecting everything else. So this stress is important to address for people's mental health. I love the World Health Organization's definition of mental health. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. One of the things I really like in here, can cope with the normal stresses of life. So as David mentioned earlier, we had stuff that I think that's not normal stress, like mass shootings, economic stuff, and then we added COVID onto it. So what we've been dealing with and what parents and employees are dealing with is not the normal stresses of life. So it is no wonder that people are struggling with their mental health. What's interesting too, 24% of parents, this was done, I believe this one was done in 2021, have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder since the pandemic started. That's an increase of 24%. We already had problems with mental health. I think a lot of us know that. I always do like to say, though, when we're talking about mental health and when people are struggling with mental health, you don't have to have a diagnosis to be struggling with mental health. A lot of added stress, chronic stress, that's going to affect your mental health. So when people, like David, said he doesn't struggle with some mental health, we all still need to be thinking about what is best for our mental health, because we saw how it affects our whole lives and our whole being. So it's really important. But knowing that if you're struggling with mental health, diagnosis or not, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. As a therapist and working with Nivati on trying to destigmatize mental health, we really want to talk about, hey, it's normal. A lot of us struggle, and a lot of us have been struggling over the last 2 years, especially. This pandemic, we know that we were in a mental health crisis before. We were. Then the pandemic came, kind of threw gasoline on the fire, and now we know that we're in a really bad place with mental health. I think when I look at the news, every day I see a new article and new studies that have been done about how this pandemic is affecting people's mental health. But what's really scary is we know it's not just right now. We know that when COVID ends, not really ends, but when we're not in all these, lockdowns and everything, but we're gonna see mental health problems for years to come. In the mental health field, we're expecting at least a decade of issues from this time period to be showing up in our therapy room. So it's not just something that we need to say, hey, let's help our employees right now. Yeah, that's great, I love that. But how can we also help them for these next 10 plus years to come, that we know all of these problems are gonna be having on our employees and on our families?
Okay. Sorry, I gotta turn that back on. Okay, so we're going to talk about why employers should care, right? And this is where I think things are starting to change, and employers are understanding the difference, right? So obviously, mental health is expensive. I think what surprises a lot of people is mental health is way more expensive than we all thought. The economic cost with mental disorders is $16 trillion. That's more than diabetes, that's more than cardiovascular disease, it's more than respiratory disease, it's more than cancer, actually, which is really surprising. Like, the cost of mental health is just expensive. It's expensive on the employers in terms of a lot of other components, too. Where it really hits the employer's pocketbooks, if you will, is actually in what we're seeing as presenteeism and absenteeism. It is said that those who struggle with major mental health disorders actually, on average, are going to lose 34 days a year in productivity. Now, that doesn't mean they're calling in sick 34 days. It could be, but generally that's not it. What it is a lot of time lost with the amount of stress that I spend staring at the wall, wondering, like, what the hell am I doing, right? That's where a lot of this time actually gets lost. And so those who are struggling with mental health will call in sick. They will have more sick days. We've talked about that already. But they'll also just be less productive in general, which is not great for the company in terms of, like, the productivity, but it also, like, puts, I think, an emphasis on where the company can help, right? When they are in the office and maybe not present, right, there's an impact on the ability to concentrate. So they're just not as productive when they are actually working. Sleep becomes tougher. And so therefore, a disruption in sleep really can decrease the productivity. And depending on the type of job, like careless mistakes or anything like that can come up. And then obviously, physical issues and chronic pain can be a part of that, which then does add actually to the healthcare costs. So when we do ROI calculations on companies and what the effects of mental health and treating mental health can be, we're actually finding that actively treating mental health can actually save companies 6 to 7 times the investment that they put into actively treating that, because they are seeing not only just a reduction or an increase in productivity, they're seeing an increase in retention, and they're also seeing an increase in engagement, which just makes everybody culturally feel better about the work that they're doing. But what we don't actually calculate in our ROI studies, but is actually equally true, is a reduction in healthcare costs, which sometimes the employers are up for. This is the part that really gets me kind of crazy. Is it bothers me to an extent when I think about this stat, but 50% of the employees will never actually seek help and try to take care of it. And there's a number of reasons why that is. If you look at this study, again, this comes from mental health treatment survey that they did by the WHO. They surveyed 65,000 people who were clinically diagnosed with a mental health disorder, depression, anxiety, whatever the case may be. And they asked them to say, why are you not getting treated, right? If you have a diagnosable condition, how come you're not getting treated? Out of that, about a quarter of the people that responded gave structural barriers, okay? So that is it costs too much, or it's not available in my area, or maybe it took 6 weeks to actually get an appointment if you've gone the traditional route. Transportation to the appointment is really tough. It's not convenient for my actual schedule and what I have to actually do to work. So that's a problem for sure, right? But what's actually a bigger problem is 96%, I believe, of the 65,000 people who had this actually stated that attitudinal barriers are actually the problem for them to get help. That includes stigmas associated with mental health. They're embarrassed, or maybe they don't want to mention it because they might get treated differently. Employer confidentiality is a big one. They don't necessarily trust you to know that they have these issues, even though oftentimes their way to get the support from a structural standpoint is through their employer, right? But they don't want to trust you with that. Belief it will get better on its own. I think we all kind of have that. Just give it time and it will heal, right? Perceived ineffectiveness, want to handle it themselves, right? They, again, don't. That's why we talk about just mentioning and being open about it, because that itself is just breaking down that stigma. And or a lack of understanding and severity. So education actually needs to come in. And we do a ton of workshops with companies just to help people recognize what those signs are. And that's what we're going to get into here in just a minute.
Okay, yeah, so let's talk more about more of the attitudinal barriers and what we can start doing to help break those down. The main strategies that we want to focus on when we're talking about how we support parents and families in the workplace are these 4, and we're going to go over each one in a little bit more detail. Having flexible options, an open dialogue, providing resources, as well as community. So with flexible options, 96% of employees need, not want, need flexibility in the workplace. I think that we have found that especially these last couple of years, that more and more people want that flexibility. So some workplace options for flexibility, of course, providing remote options. But now with people going back into work, into the office, they still want kind of that flexibility that they could work from home as well. I find a lot of people on both sides that want to go in, that want to stay home, so maybe offering more flexibility with having remote work. Flexible working hours, so not having the traditional 9 to 5, having them work out their hours that they need, and especially for parents, that's extremely helpful. I'm a single mom to teenagers, and having the flexible hours is a lifesaver for me. I don't know how I could work a regular 9 to 5. Having some less travel, possibly reducing hours or workload is also going to be helping with that workplace flexibility. The company flexibility, so wellness days. I actually love this. I run an HR anxiety support group. If anyone's ever interested, just let me know. But what I had found is a lot of companies were offering things like, hey, let's have a wellness day once a month. Or they would do a wellness hours where they started at like 12 o'clock that day, and you just took that time off for yourself. Or that day off was just for them to just have off and just enjoy. Don't stress about work. And I actually did find that a lot of employees, when the HR talked about that a lot of the employees really liked that one. Having health hours. So this is like PTO, but for mental health. I think as we are starting to talk more about mental health, when we offer those mental health days, it's going to encourage people to say, you know what, I am struggling, and I'm going to use that. I love mental health days. I actually also give my kids mental health days for school. No questions asked, they just get the mental health day. I think they're really a lot more important now than ever. And then paid family leave. We offer, people get vacation time and they get some sick time. But for parents, it's really stressful. I know this is probably one of my most stressful times is when I have a kid sick and I'm trying to work. Like, it's so hard to balance that. And especially if you have two people working who's taking care of the kid. So just making sure that we're offering a bunch of different options for the company as well.
I think it's really important if you remember 50% of the people will not ask for help. They will not ask for these benefits. And so therefore, I think it's on the employer and the company to be a little bit more proactive in driving these programs and allowing these programs to come forth, because you're not going to get asked to do it. So you've got to be proactive in actually making this happen. So I just think that's important.
Definitely, yeah, I agree with that. So having the open dialogue. We've said this a few times already. It is going to be one of the number one things to destigmatize mental health. This is going to be what gets employees saying, we need help. And in other presentations we've done, there are studies that show that employees are now, more than in the past, looking for companies that address mental health. And how do they support mental health? Employees really want that. Talking about it, get leadership involved. A lot of studies that show when it comes from the leaders, the employees are more likely to feel more comfortable saying, I'm struggling, or hey, let's talk about this. That is one thing that is huge here at Nivati that I've always felt very comfortable with is the people above me say, hey, I'm struggling, or it's okay to not be okay, those kind of things, and it really makes it say like, hey, I need to take some time for myself. Training managers and HR as well on how to talk, which we'll talk about, offering webinars, trainings. I do company trainings where we talk about different mental health problems and how you can seek help for those kind of things. Just providing that to employees is really helpful. And communicating that it's confidential. Like David mentioned, people don't want to go to their employer and say that they're struggling. And so sometimes when they're not going to seek for that help, putting it out there and talking about it and saying, hey, this is private, it gives them that safe space where they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable approaching you. So best practices for providing this open dialogue. Understand that there's the struggles, kind of mentioned earlier, sleep disturbances, making more mistakes at work, not showing up as often, creating that safe space, encouraging them to share their feelings, and using good communication skills and listening skills, which we're going to talk about because I think it's a really important one when we're dealing with people that are struggling with mental health. If they come to us and say they're struggling, just some key points on what to say and not to say. And also taking care of your mental health. We can't support other people if we are not in a good place ourselves. I have learned that firsthand as a therapist. If I'm ever struggling with my mental health, I have to take some time to take care of myself before I can be there for my clients and for my children and for my colleagues. As well as providing employee education. So talking about the mental health, like we've been talking about, saying, hey, these are kind of some of the things that you might be struggling with. Here's some signs of anxiety. Here's some signs of depression. Is this something you're struggling with? And that's part of the company trainings that we do sometimes where we talk to the employees about mental health and the signs and symptoms of it. Okay, so how to communicate. I always start over here on the what not to say first. So what not to say. These are things like, why don't you just snap out of it? It's all in your head. Look at the bright side. Why are you being so negative? I think you're being too sensitive. Where's one of my favorites? One that a lot of people say is, you don't have it that bad. Other people have it worse than you. Which, in all reality, somebody always has it worse. Somebody always has it better than everybody. It's just kind of how it works. But what this stuff does is this diminishes a person's struggles. Is saying your struggles really don't matter, and they're really not that important. When that person is really struggling, no matter if it's a small issue to you or not, that person's struggling. So if a person comes to us and says, hey, I'm struggling with my mental health, these are going to be a little bit better things to say to them. I'm here to talk. If you can handle that yourself, if you can take that on, sometimes we can't. How are you coping? I wanted to check in. I've noticed you've been maybe kind of distant or sad, kind of missing, maybe you're sleepy a little bit more, not doing as well in your work. Is there something else going on instead of just addressing that work piece? Has work been stressful for you lately? I love when my supervisor asks me that, because I can take a lot of stuff on, and I'm like, yeah, I've got this. But I usually won't go up and just be like, I'm stressed to the max. And so I do think that having that open dialogue, at Nivati, we do one-on-ones a lot, and it really helps having that dialogue where you can have the opportunity to ask those kind of questions, to get them to hopefully talk about their mental health. Okay.
So we're going to talk a little bit about mental health and what, as an employer, you can do. How many would say their number one tool that they offer employees is their EAP for mental health? Yeah. How many have more tools available to them outside of their EAP for mental health? A lot less hands. Couple people. Okay. EAPs have a function when it comes to mental health, and that function generally is for crisis situation only. What it doesn't necessarily do is address or help the employee work on it proactively or get to a point that works for them. And so that's why we are big believers that mental health care is not a one-size-fits-all. A lot of times the EAP, the traditional EAP, now not every EAP is the same, but the traditional EAP that most of us just get lumped into with our health care really has a lot of barriers to actually using it. You want to provide options when you're looking at mental health solutions. So options for maybe in-person sessions or one-on-one sessions. Teletherapy is a new way of doing that and approaching that, a little bit more flexible for people. Actually, and I was talking to some people earlier today, what's really beneficial about the virtual therapy component of it is actually the confidentiality. Like, they're not even walking into an office and having to worry about stigmas or shame by walking into an office. Like, they're doing it from somewhere they're comfortable at. And that's actually proven to be quite beneficial in a lot of ways. Pre-recorded mental health videos. And along that line, I was also mentioning how, in the same conversation actually, it's funny, how people are actually comfortable just talking to a chatbot. Like, not even a real person, but just expressing themselves with somebody who's not gonna judge them in the responses that they get back. Even though they know 100%, like, we're not fooling them, nobody's getting fooled with this. They know it's an Autobot of sorts. But just because they can divulge whatever they want and there's no judgment coming back, that's really helpful for people. Coaching options. Some people, there's a stigma with therapy, that's okay. So maybe they want to talk to a life coach. And then, of course, we do have phone and text crisis lines for those that really need it. And then you do have your traditional EAP, which is really, again, designed for crisis management and those who are seeking, having a individual moment in time where they really need to talk to somebody quick. You want to make sure that your programs are convenient with either mobile apps. There's a lot of mobile apps that are coming out that address mental health in different ways. Again, a lot of times the individual is not going to ask for the help. So having a sponsored program already and giving them a direction to go to is really helpful, because they do actually rely on their employer for these type of benefits. They won't seek it out themselves, but at the same time, they'll take advantage if it's given to them. Giving them direct access to book their own sessions with practitioners is actually really important. And that's one of the things that we find most important. A lot of traditional EAPs, not all of them are like this, but some of them have to go to HR, and the HR has to set up the appointment. Or they have to call somebody and they say, okay, you want to talk to X, Y, and Z, and they book the appointment for them. Like, there's this middleman, which just complicates everything. And again, it diminishes that trust value, which is what people really have a problem with here. And then obviously setting hard limits, which most traditional EAPs have, 1 to 2, because it's not meant for long-term care, it's meant for crisis management only. And so therefore, having the ability to continue on with the counselor that they've built a relationship with is really important. And those are things you want to consider when setting up this program.
And I was just going to kind of come out on EAP. So I know EAP's out there. I know a lot of companies provide it. But it is difficult. As a therapist, I don't like working for EAPs because of these hard limits that they have, and because it does it's a lot more difficult. We usually have to fill out a little bit more paperwork sometimes. If they want more care, we have to fill out other stuff. And it's hard. I think it's hard as a therapist to work with EAPs. And so I don't think you find the most quality there, but there are still some that are great in there. One of the things earlier on that last slide that I want to mention is providing, I'm going to go back to it just real quick, providing all the options. So something that I know Nivati found in the options we provide, because we do have therapy, downloadable resources, videos, coaching, and different people we're using different ones. And so it is this whole mental health care. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The people that were doing therapy weren't the same ones doing the videos, and there were people doing videos, that weren't doing the coaching. So really having these options is so helpful for people, because they're all going to get help in a different way.
And then the last thing we do have here, and I think this is going to get shared out. I'm not sure. We'll talk to From Day One on that. But you can also hit us up and we'll share it out if you want. But we do have hotlines here. You guys can take a picture of the slide if you need. What's really great, especially for parents on this side, is there is a national parent hotline who might just be struggling with some kids, which happens every day for me. Postpartum for new moms, which I think is awesome. Domestic violence hotline as well, if you need that. So that's a little bit more parent-oriented hotlines available to you. If you need that. And then again, come visit us or talk to us and we can share this out to you specifically if you need.
Okay. And then the last one we want to talk about is building a community. This is one of my favorites to always talk about because people thrive off of social interactions and support systems in some way or another, introverts or extroverts. They always thrive off of a support system. This study was done by American Psychological Association just last year. 83% of fathers and 69% of mothers are needing more emotional support. It's not really surprising with everything that we've had going on. Parents feel more isolated right now. And in this community support, when we build a community, they're less likely to feel isolated. They're going to feel more supported. They're going to have a support system. And that support system for all people, and especially parents, can be so helpful for someone's mental health. Whenever people come into my office, I always ask what their support system is. I might not come out in those words, so your therapist might not say that exactly, but your therapist is most likely looking at who's in your support system. It also gives people more social interactions, and building a community is just going to improve a person's mental health. We know that. And so how are ways that we can build a community within the workplace? These are some that have been found to help, and some ideas and some things that we do here at Nivati as well. So there's forums, creating a space like Google Chats or Slack, where people can share their experiences, people can share their struggles, or even just looking for advice. Those can be really helpful, parent-related or not parent-related. It can be either for those. Having work-sponsored events, so company events to help support families. Bring your kid to work day. It just feels more of like an inclusion of a person to bring in their community. That's part of their community, their family. Having contests, costumes or whatever it is, as well. I mean, you can do this stuff too, company party with kids, online events. You can do this stuff with kids or without kids as well. But we find that parents sometimes really appreciate that because it's kind of a little bit of some less stress on what do I do with my kids for this kind of stuff. As well as company programs. 2 company programs that really help build community that support mental health that a lot of companies don't necessarily think of or provide. So one of it is a mindfulness program. Mindfulness, probably my most favorite thing to ever do with any of my clients. Mindfulness, this definition here, calmly acknowledging one's thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, used as a therapeutic technique. So we use mindfulness in a lot of different evidence-based therapy treatments. Evidence-based means it's studied, researched. We can't use other stuff unless it's been evidence-based. And it is actually shown that when people practice mindfulness, they have a decrease in symptoms of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and ADHD. I know a lot of people kind of are like, how can that be? Because that's a hard one for people with ADHD, but it is possible. So providing mindfulness programs, so having these opportunities where people can practice mindfulness, which we'll talk on the next slide. There are studies that show how mindfulness helps in the workplace. So when we have mindful leaders, when we're just focusing on our leaders being more mindful, we find that there's lower employee emotional exhaustion. They have improved work balance for employees. Their employees have a better job performance. It increases that leader self-confidence and improves their leadership skills as well as building their resiliency. So we know that when leaders practice mindfulness, that they are going to be a better leader. They're also going to have better employees. So benefits of mindfulness for the employees: decreases stress, improves their work engagement, increases creativity, it improves their physical health. They're less likely to turn to those substances. So now we're teaching them healthy coping skills instead of those turning to the not healthy coping skills we talked about earlier. We just know it overall improves their mental health. So mindfulness practices. I've already kind of talked about that stuff up there. So here's some ways that people can practice mindfulness that sometimes they don't really think about. Sometimes people think, I can't be mindful. I can teach pretty much anybody to be mindful because there's a trick with it. So mindfulness exercises that are used in therapeutic techniques, but a lot of times they do pull in breath work. And I love breath work. It is being studied more for therapy because it does help improve a person's physical and psychological health. Along with meditation, we all know what meditation is. Meditation helps with relaxation, decreases stress. Part of it's because it pulls in mindfulness, and that's why it's decreasing your stress. But it's really good to help increase a person's use of mindfulness, as well as yoga. I know people in yoga, people are like, oh my gosh, I'm a yoga teacher, so of course I'm gonna pull this in. But, because yoga can be physical and a workout, fine, whatever. I use yoga to pull in mindfulness. I teach yoga to teach my clients mindfulness because I know when they're practicing mindfulness, they're gonna have a calmer life, less stress, and better mental health. So really it can be used for however, but some people I also know like the more physical part of yoga, and that's fine too, and that helps them improve their mindfulness. So it's that whole mental health care. It's not a one size fits all. You have to find what works for you. The other program that is really great in creating community is self-care. Self-care, sorry, I don't know this slide very well. This one, so it encourages and incentivizes self-care, provide group mindfulness and meditations. Okay, so this is talking about creating programs. So have a program where you have a group that you say, hey, let's practice some mindfulness or do mindfulness at home this week. How do we do it? And you talk about it in those forums that we talked about. Like having those forums are great places to talk about mindfulness, what's working, what's not, as well as self-care. Self-care is a major one to be talked about. Self-care, sometimes they think bubble baths, and we call it good. But self-care is so much more than that. It really is very important. We're looking at things that like, what are we doing? How are we taking care of our bodies? Are we getting into the doctors? Are you getting your checkups? That's part of your self-care. Having a healthy sleep hygiene, taking time to relax, the support system that we talked about, turning off your phone, doing things that you enjoy. So self-care is more than just taking a moment, like 10 minutes or an hour to do something fun. It really is creating a routine that practices this self-care. So it's helpful for employees to create these community programs to get parents and to get employees involved in things like mindfulness programs, self-care programs where we're encouraging this kind of stuff, because this stuff is also helpful for proactive care, so they don't get to the point of that burnout, of that stress, where we're seeing those problems come in at work.
All right, so thank you, Haeli. Haeli Harris, everybody. All right, so if you would like to learn more, there's a couple options. We do have this mental health fitness toolkit. So this gives you some other great resources written by Haeli on programs and things that you can do within your company. You can scan that QR code. You can go to Nivati.com, mental fitness toolkit, to download that. We also, if you want to learn directly from Haeli, we do offer a HR support group where Haeli leads a 4-class over the course of 4 weeks. She does this 4-week course class for HR people to actually. What we find is HR people actually need a lot of community as well and understand each other, because they are experiencing, I have to give it to you, you guys do a fabulous job and sometimes are the sounding board for all the employees and just get everything thrown at you. And so if you want a little bit of support from peers led by Haeli, you're welcome to join that. Just go to Nivati.com, click on the communities tab on our website, and that will add you to our groups. It's a 4-week course that she does every month. And then, of course, come by our booth if you want to learn more. We do have a giveaway of a massager of sorts. It's really cool. And then if you want to learn more about what we can do, come chat with us. But my name is David Malmborg. It's Haeli Harris. And I think we have time for Q&A.
Yeah.
We're doing good. So we can do some Q&A if you guys want. I can throw a mask on and run the mic around if you guys rather. Yeah, go for it.
Well, my question is, we have been providing monthly mindfulness sessions, so we work with a licensed mental health therapist all last year and through this year. So there was on a Wednesday, we called it Mindfulness Wednesday. So Wednesday was the theoretical concept about stress or compassion or compassion fatigue, because we work with home health care workers. And then on the Thursday, we gave them the actual practical work on what you need to do, and it was obviously all on Zoom. However, one thing that we're having a challenge with is that, as I kind of wrote the question about, is what are we doing to increase the available resources for those of varying gender identities, cultures, ethnicities, and races for mental health care? You can't find them. There's 3 Black therapists in a 100-mile radius. And so when somebody wants somebody that might speak Spanish or might speak another language, they're not available. And so that's the challenge that we're having now.
I completely agree. I think it's a big challenge in the mental health field, and it is something that I know a lot of mental health therapists talk about, is that we need more of that type of inclusion and that type of diversity, because it is a very big problem. So yeah, no, I agree. And I do think it's getting talked about more and more with the things that have happened in the last couple of years.
I'd say one of the things that we are learning, not really learning, but we understand is an issue is actually the state licensing components, right? Like a lot of the counseling laws have not caught up to the technology available to do counseling, right? And so you have 3, minority counselors available in your area where, I'm not sure what, Seattle, okay, local, I should have guessed, right? Seattle, right, local. So there's 3 minority-oriented counselors and a population who needs more help with that. But what we're finding is sometimes with the virtual side of things, there are different population centers that have more diverse counselors, but they're licensed within the state. But sometimes that's just not the case at all either. We work a lot with our counselors to get them actually certified in different states to help kind of just allow them to talk with more people. But they have to go, we sponsor their certification state by state so that we can get more. But like, I'm from Utah, and there's just not a lot of black people in Utah. But we actually have a few counselors because they actually live in Virginia, and they're certified in Utah. And that's what we're trying to do to help kind of eliminate that. But the laws still require that they get certified, and so we are helping our counselors get to that point. It's not perfect, but that's where I think a lot of the problem's coming from is just the way the state certifications are currently laid out. So everybody heard that question, right? Do I need to repeat these? No? Okay, go ahead.
There's some data presented about kind of like what helps families, as far as flexible work options and stuff. And it seems to me when I think about it, I have 2 sets of workers. One that can be eligible for kind of like hybrid work. Then we have our manufacturing employees that can't do the flexible work options. So is there data, is there studies to where maybe I can look into, like how do we do that for folks that have to be there? How do we support them?
And I'm not familiar with any studies as far as with that. That's something I would definitely think would be something good to look into, though. And that's where I think providing more of the like family leave time, the mental health days, so that they have some of that flexibility where they can't work from home, but it's a little bit less stressful to have to take time off, which I know is hard right now because staffing is even shorter. So then it's harder to take time off because, we're in kind of a pickle.
I know we are seeing people with blue-collar jobs finding more interest. Like there's a lot of blue-collar jobs in manufacturing. I don't know if you want to qualify as blue-collar, but there's kind of a bigger stigma associated with some of those workers. But we are finding as we present more options to them, like they will take advantage of it on their own time. And so maybe, again, just talking to somebody might help them, even though they don't have the flexible work options available to them. Maybe you got to look at more time off options. I don't really have a good answer to your question when it comes to manufacturing. But we do see that blue-collar workers are taking advantage of remote-based platforms and our video content in particular so that they can kind of just do it on their own time and get the care that they still need. So, was there another hand over here I thought I saw? Going once. Haeli and myself will be available if you guys want to just chat one-on-one. And then again, we have a tabletop in the lunch area. You're welcome to come by. Liv is there with us. She's one of our well-being specialists as well, and we can help answer any questions you guys have. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.